longing.
But we have, I know Dina's been with us a long time, Susan, everybody here has been with us a very long time, so. And we have today we have Janet, so we welcome any and all who want to participate in this. Let me grab my script so I don't go rambling too much. And as soon as I get to page one, I tried to practice this morning, but Davis was here and I didn't want to practice in front of him. Okay. So 21st century women tend to look at our 19th century counterparts as politically oppressed, without a lot of rights, and not at all in charge of their own destiny. And they didn't have credit cards. So, that was the 20th century. However, they would probably disagree with that assessment. And certainly the women we're going to be meeting today would disagree with that. Between 1841 and 1869, when the railroad was completed, approximately 500,000 people traveled west, overland. The vast majority, almost 300,000, came to California, 80,000 went to Oregon, and another 70 took the Mormon Trail through Utah. And so during that time, they faced a lot of hardships, but they all went for the same reason that the Pilgrims came, looking for opportunities, looking for wealth and comfort, and certainly adventure. And they got a lot of adventure along the way. With it, they dragged the border of the frontier literally with them each step until it stretched literally from sea to shining sea. They changed their lives, they changed the landscape, and they most definitely altered world history. And we'll learn more about that today. Now, these changes started out as small things. Let's go someplace new. Maybe we'll strike it rich in gold. Maybe we'll find good farmland. As more information trickled back to the east, people became more intrigued with the idea. Oh, that is kind of a cool sound effect. But they brought with them the pioneer spirit, which is, let's try something new, willingness to risk hardship for something new and adventurous. And not only that, but they, that sort of let's just give it a try. What the heck? Try it and see what happens. And that's what fueled their curiosity and their dreams as well. And so they all came with that sort of can-do spirit. And that's the legacy that those women left to us today. They did have some trouble along the way. This is a quote from a woman by the name of Lavina Porter. I would make a brave effort to be cheerful and patient until the camp work was done. Then, starting out ahead of the team and my men folks, when I was sure I was out of earshot, I threw myself down on the unfriendly desert and gave way to tears and sobs, wondering why I left home and why I agreed to go on this wild goose chase. But in spite of their despair, their periodic despair, they persevered, they came to California. Our state motto, Eureka, we usually think of that in terms of the gold rush, but the women who came, they found a whole lot more than just gold. The wagon train, you got west on a wagon train in one of two ways. You came with a group of family and friends, you found a map somewhere that you thought was reliable, or hoped at least that it was, or you joined a wagon train. And to do that, you would travel to the west side of the Mississippi River, usually to Independence or St. Joseph's, Missouri, and you would sign on to a wagon train led by a professional wagon master. The wagon master was a man, a powerful man. His word was the law. He had the same power as a ship's captain, and at a salary of $125 a week, his pay was comparable to a month. His pay was comparable to a riverboat captain, and he had absolute authority. Now, I am doing 3 things differently this year with the play. This is the first time I have invented a character. There were no women wagon masters until I found one, and she got sick today. And so once again, I call on my trusty Christine, who, by the way, thank you, did the decorating and the food. I thank you. And thank you. And it's now going, so listen up, she's now going to tell you what you need for the wagon train.
Okay. Your first requirement is obviously a wagon, preferably a schooner, which is smaller, easier to pull, and faster than a Conestoga. You will also need spare parts, as trees are not plentiful along the plains, and you will need animals to pull the loaded vehicle. The cost of outfitting a wagon and team will cost you about $1,000, which today is like $25,000. What animals to use is debatable, and although horses can be used, the main choice is between oxen and mules. Mules are tough and durable, move faster, do not get sore feet as oxen do, and can subsist on cottonwood bark and alkaline water. Oxen, on the other hand, are less likely to be stolen to mules, are better able to withstand fatigue, can exist on a wider variety of sparse vegetation, and are less likely to stray from camp, are safer, more reliable, and almost as fast. Cost is also important, with a mule at times costing 3 times that of a single ox. A final item in your decision is that in an emergency, oxen can lead. We did not eat that today. Your survival depends on a number of factors, perhaps most importantly, food. You must have supplies that will last the journey. Each family should bring no less than 200 pounds of flour and 100 pounds of bacon for every family member, as well as other provisions, beans, rice, ship biscuits, and dried fruits being particularly recommended. As a wagon master, I am in charge. The trip will be long and difficult and should take 5 or 6 months depending on weather and other difficulties, but we should be able to cover about 10 miles a day. I want to assure you that I know what I'm doing and will show you how to survive, fend off attacks. I can care for sick animals and people, hunt, repair broken wagons, and negotiate disputes between landowners, outlaws, Native Americans, or between those within our groups. Let me make it clear then that my skills as wagon master and your following my lead will make the difference between life and death, yours and mine. There is one more important thing we need to discuss, and that's crime. There isn't much, but it can happen. Disputes such as travel speed, treatment of animals, route, and leadership can lead tensions to rise and split some folks apart. The full spectrum of human emotions often leads to impatience and short tempers, which lead to arguments, fights, and even murder. Seeing as how there's no civil law, lawmen, or courts of law to protect you on the trail, you will be signing a written constitution to which you can refer when disagreements get out of hand. These regulations include rules for decision-making, voting, camping and marching, restrictions on gambling and drinking, defense, private property rights, failing to perform duties, security for the sick or bereaved, rules for infractions, and penalties for crimes. For most minor crimes, mediation does the trick, but serious crimes will be addressed by forming a jury and holding a trial. Punishment for serious offenses may include whipping, banishment from the wagon train, hanging, and firing squad. Some of you look a little shocked, but all of this is necessary to keep the peace between all of you who will be living and working together for the next several months. But for now, best to go shopping.
I will tell really one story about a man named John Smith, of course. And he was, right out of the gate, he was a curmudgeon and no one liked him because he complained that everybody's wagon was kicking up dust. And a few days into the trip, a young boy became orphaned, and Mr. Smith took him in. He basically wanted somebody to do all the work. But all he did was complain, you eat too much, you can't do anything, and then one day a wheel fell off the wagon, which had nothing to do with the boy. I'll fix you, he said angrily to the boy, and of course the wagon master and the others in the wagon train said, you can't treat him like that. So the next morning, the two went out hunting for some game, and only John Smith came back. So several of the men on the wagon train went in search of the boy. They didn't find him. So they charged John Smith with murder, tried him, hanged him, and buried him. So it is true. That was the law. The wagon master. Boom. And then, of course, on the family ones, you appointed someone who was the leader. And they still all made it. Okay. Next, we're going to meet a young woman. But first, let me tell you, Dr. John Marsh, who owned land which is now near Mount Diablo in Contra County, was living in what was at that time Alta, California, which was part of Mexico. And Mexico was getting kind of picky about landowners being Mexican. He wanted them to be Mexican citizens. And Marsh was concerned, he wanted to be a Mexican citizen, he wanted California to be part of the United States. And he was worried with the French, the Spanish, and the English that they would all fight over California. And so he did a map, he sent it back east to a lot of people, and it sparked the curiosity of two young men, James Bidwell and William Bartleson. Bartles and James. Anybody remember Bartles and James? I'm sorry. And they followed his map, and they came, and one of the people on that trip we're gonna meet right now, that is Nancy Kelsey.
Thank you. Can you still, video me from this angle, or should I stand up?
We're good. We see you.
What?
We're fine. We can see you from this
Fine?
angle.
Okay, thank you. You have to imagine that I have a full dress on that's prairie style, besides my hat. Okay, thank you. My name is Nancy Kelsey, and I was born in Kentucky in 1823. And at the age of 15, I married Benjamin Kelsey, 10 years my senior. A year later, our daughter, Martha Ann, was born, and the next year in May of 1841, 2 weeks after the death of our newborn son, we joined the Bidwell-Bartleson wagon train and headed west. At Soda Springs in present-day Idaho, the immigrant train split, which a lot of them did, some to California and some to Oregon. Our group of 30 men and I went southwest toward California without a map. We became lost and had to abandon our wagons and push ahead with oxen and horses. When food ran short, we ate the oxen and then the horse. Exhausted and half-starved, we finally crossed the top of the Sierras in October, near what is now known as Sonora Pass. On the westward descent into California, 4 pack animals fell over a cliff, carrying everything we owned. All of our supplies. And for 2 days, we survived on acorns. We reached Sutter's Fort near present-day Sacramento on Christmas Day, 1841, after 7 months on the trail. I was the first pioneer woman to set foot in Utah and cross over Sonora Pass, all the while carrying a baby Martha, in my arms. I didn't know it at the time, but I was the first woman to travel to California by wagon train. In 1843, we purchased a 2,000-acre farm in Calistoga, in present-day Napa Valley. In 1844, the home was attacked by Native Americans, and our second daughter, she and I, rolled in a blanket, and we both survived. By 1848, we had 4 children, and Ben left me at Sutter's Fort to mine for gold. He returned home with $16,000 in profit, a considerable sum for that time in 1851. And then he became sick with TB, and we lost our home and ranch. After moving around California, we sought drier weather for my husband and moved to Mexico, then back to Texas, into Texas. In 1861, we were in West Texas with some other wanderers. Ben and the other men had left our camp to hunt wild turkeys when a band of Comanches appeared. Our older daughters hid in the brush while we women hid with the small children in a cave. I realized that I had forgotten to hide the money which we had brought along to buy cattle. That's $10,000 was all the money we had in the world. And the Indians pillaged the camp, took the money, and started away when they found our 13-year-old daughter. They succeeded in catching my girl because her dress got tangled in the brush. She was 12 years old. We found her the next day, but oh, the anxiety I felt during the long night. Yes, we found her, but my anguish was indescribable when I discovered that she had been scalped. And as a result, was left deranged, the mind deranged. My husband and 17 men followed the Indians 300 miles but never caught up with them. Our daughter only lived a few more years. Our family moved back to California and Ben died in 1889 in Los Angeles. I wasn't too fond of cities, so I moved closer to Cottonwood Canyon in northern Santa Barbara County because Martha Ann, the baby I carried across the Sierras, was there. I didn't have much. I raised chickens, sold eggs, and worked as a midwife and an herbalist. When I learned I had inoperable cancer, and all I wanted was to be buried in a real store-bought coffin, not just a box built out of wood boards. Thanks to my friends, I got my wish.
There are a couple of stories today that are rather gruesome about Native Americans, but by and large, they were not the cause of death for the passengers. We talked about this at one of our meetings. They were not to be feared. Of the 300,000 people who traveled, about 350 were deaths at the hand of Native Americans, and the same number were killed. They were largely friendly and tried to help in any way that they could. So I don't want to give the impression that everybody was mistreated. And we'll hear more about that as we go on. But I do want to mention one thing, and that's the Bear Flag Rebellion. I don't remember learning it in school, but in about 1846, at about the time of John Marsh, the Mexican government was coming down hard and saying you must be a citizen of Mexico in order to own land. And several landowners who wanted this to become part of the United States revolted under Captain John C. Fremont. And they became known as the Bear Flag Rebellion because Nancy Kelsey and two of her friends made a flag. Nancy donated a 3x5 piece of plain muslin. She ripped up a pink petticoat to put a red stripe on the bottom and a red star, which was evocative of the Lone Star of Texas, the Texas Republic flag. They took pokeberry juice and wrote California Republic. And they also used the juice, someone, no one lays claim to it, drew a bear on the flag. And hence, it was called the Bear Flag Rebellion, and the rebels were called the Bears. And so the flag, apparently the bear looked more like a hawk. I'll have some slides next month. I don't have them here with me today. But in 1911, with a much better looking bear, that became the California state flag. So thank you, Nancy. All right. Okay. Next we're going to meet, I have to read all these names. Sarah Armstrong Montgomery Green Wallace. And we'll get an explanation. Can you, is it better if she stands over here?
Yeah, probably bigger than.
Yeah.
I was an 18-year-old newlywed from Ohio when we joined other California settlers in Missouri. Although the move west was my husband's idea, I too was hoping for a better life in the West, far away from the dreary farm life. But there was no relief from the daily drudgery of my endless chores on the journey. I could summarize the female overland experience as being all right for men and dogs, but hell on women and horses. And while the arduous trek was tough, the early days in California proved just as challenging. Shortly after we arrived at Sutter's Fort in early 1845, Captain John Sutter ordered us north to work, hand-sawing timber into badly needed lumber. We built ourselves a small one-room cabin near Sutter Creek and settled in. Life for pioneer women in early California was lonely and isolated, and endless duties and long distances between settlements gave us few opportunities to visit one another. So I organized California's first quilting bee. Nearly 20 women attended, a surprising number considering the difficulty and danger of winter travel. We sewed, we talked, and we laughed late into the night. And I wondered how I could do more. My husband joined the 1846 Bear Flag Rebellion, but when the excitement of the rebellion faded, he grew bored with married life, and he deserted me, leaving me penniless. 2 years later, I married Talbot Green, a successful merchant in San Francisco who was generous and well-liked, but also somewhat mysterious. He had traveled to California on horseback with the 1841 Bidwell Party, carrying medical supplies and acting as a doctor. He had also packed a heavy bag of metal that he claimed was lead for rifle balls. I loved my husband and our life in San Francisco. I was pregnant with my first child when my husband ran for mayor, but his shady past was discovered by a local tabloid. He was publicly denounced as a fugitive bank clerk from Pennsylvania named Paul Geddes, who had deserted his wife and children. Presumably, the bag of lead he had hauled across the continent contained gold bullion stolen from the bank. Of course, he denied the charges and, vowing to clear his name, shipped out for the East Coast after his friends threw him a going-away party. It wasn't long before I found myself deserted once again. In that divorce settlement, I acquired 250 acres called Mayfield Farm, which is today's southern Palo Alto. In 1854, at age 29, I married Joseph Wallace. My husband and I settled in my Mayfield home and had 4 more children. Though wealthy in my own right, after marrying Joseph, a well-known attorney and popular politician from Santa Clara County, it was legally in his name due to the law governing married women's property at the time. This was a law I lobbied to change. We both became staunch supporters of women's suffrage and hosted meetings at our farm, including one for Elizabeth Stanton when she toured the West. In 1873, the California State Women's Suffrage Educational Association was founded, and I served as the first president. I also lobbied successfully for women to practice law in California court system and for women to attend the California State College. I invested in the San Francisco and San Jose Railroad. I persuaded them to have a station in the then town of Mayfield so that I could travel from my home to Los Angeles and Sacramento in order to collect signatures and lobby legislators for my cause. The station opened in 1863. In 1875, an economic depression forced me to sell Mayfield Farm and move to a smaller holding in Mayfield, the town, which I lost after my husband's death in 1898. I then moved in with my eldest son in Los Gatos.
I want to add something. Janet is one of the tour guides at Union Cemetery, and this is her favorite person.
Resident. She's a resident of the cemetery.
She's a resident. All right. This is
I could
her
talk about her
favorite-
all day.
Yes, and will. So if you have any more questions, and also if you'd like to take a tour with Janet, just get in touch with her, and I'm sure she can give you the dates when she's available. But
Or a private tour.
yeah, no, that was awesome. Thank you very much. And she didn't know that the quilt about the quilting,
I didn't know
so
about the
we
quilting
added
bees.
something to the body of knowledge. So thank you so much.
And my mom's sister made this quilt for me.
Oh, wow.
I didn't make it.
Nice. Oh, good. That was wonderful. Thank you. I feel like we know her personally now. And now I know what a resident at a cemetery.
Yeah.
I don't like to step on them when I go to the cemetery. I'm like, I don't want to.
Usually, okay.
You think? Okay.
There's one guy that doesn't like it.
Oh, okay. I'm sure you know who he is. So although pioneering was usually started by men, many women went along. Now a lot of bachelors went, and a lot of married men went west as temporary bachelors. But once they got there, they realized that they couldn't really start a life without women, without families, and without things in the community. Many women went west because they were curious to see what was there, but they also didn't want their families to be separated. And so that was one of the reasons why so many women joined the migration. Many women met and married along the trail. Some married right after, and of course many women and men were widowed. As a result of the largest causes of death were cholera, snake bite, accidental gun shooting. That was basically what got them. You could die from cholera in one day, and it was just from unsanitary water and other problems. So cholera was the main issue. Now, most of the women were very eager to do this, but they were also concerned about maintaining their feminine culture, their female culture, and their domestic duties, which they felt was a part of who they were. And so we're now going to hear from Catherine Hahn, who was a young, newly married woman who made her way west and accepted these challenges with great strength and grace. So we now have Catherine bringing us Catherine. And if you stand right here in the middle, you're in the perfect spot.
With mounting debts and few options, my new husband and I set out to the gold fields of California. We were full of energy and enthusiasm, saw the journey's romantic wedding tour as we set out from Clinton, Iowa in April 1849 with a half dozen other families. While on the trail, we women held fast to our customs of socializing, swapping recipes and food, knitting toes. These activities kept us practiced in feminine occupation, diversion. We adapted to the use of dried buffalo chips as fuel in our cooking and adjusted to the noise and openness around us at night. But seemingly mundane chores kept home traditions alive and ensured the survival of our way of life, despite the sweeping wind and dust along the trail. Cooking on the trail was not an easy feat. Why, even the act of making coffee was difficult for one not acquainted with cooking in the open. In spite of the weight, we carried coffee beans with us. We would roast the green beans in a spider, a frying pan, grind them, cook them with water, which would make the coffee. Sometimes it was rather chewy, but we couldn't live without it. Of necessity, we had to quickly adapt to our surroundings. In addition to the supplies we carried with us, we found another food source on the plains, buffalo. After killing 2 buffalo, we enjoyed a meal of meat and roasted bone marrow. In addition to the meat and marrow, we made use of the buffalo's hide, tallow, and dung. We had to be sure that we had supplies that would last the journey. And we tried our hardest to prepare good, though at times monotonous meals. We joked that women were brought on the trails because our food was better than that made by men, and therefore prevented much sickness and waste of food. It is impossible to deny that worries about the weather and disease and the rumors of American Indian attacks on wagon trains were ever present. The fear was balanced by an adventure that took me away from home with its limited domestic sphere and plunged me into a relatively unknown realm of society. Like so many others, we took far more possessions than we needed, and many of these items did not make it to California, as we had left possessions behind to lighten the wagon's loads or make room for the sick and injured. Possessions left behind by earlier travelers became a common sight, and we sometimes built campfires using wood from abandoned wagons. Sadly, graves were another inevitable part of the scenery across the plains. As many travelers died along the way. Cholera, a common fatal disease caused by bacteria and contaminated water, took a number of lives along the trail. The disease was known to strike quickly. It could kill a person in just one day. We are also plagued with smallpox and typhoid. After more than 6 months of grueling labor and unimaginably uncomfortable travel by wagon, foot, and horse, our journey across the plains came to an end in November of 1849 when we arrived at Sacramento. Although the journey was difficult, we were lucky. We arrived in California safely with only 2 fatalities, a remarkable feat. I had always been sickly, but the activities necessary for our journey and warmer, drier climate left me markedly improved, and I found myself feeling quite robust. My husband and I settled in nearby Marysville, where he established a law practice.
Catherine Hahn is not a name that we're familiar with, but in 1849 she published A Pioneer Woman's Journey Westward, which is still considered the best primary record of overland travel. And her book is available, I think, on Amazon, or you can find excerpts of it online, but she's very well known to scholars and such. And I was looking up and preparing for this. Remember the old show Wagon Train? I don't know, it was on.
Oh, absolutely.
Wagon Train actually was considered a very close depiction of what actually happened. Obviously, it was dramatized, but it actually depicted life. And I watched a couple of episodes of it, so it was kind of interesting. Although the Native Americans, as was typical at that time, are all portrayed by Caucasians wearing makeup, which was a little off-putting. But that, if you'd like to ever watch it, is apparently a good one. They walked an average of 10 miles a day, sometimes 20. And I looked that up, and so the average woman walks for 1 mile is 2,500 steps. If you walk 20 miles a day, that's 50,000, and 10 miles a day is 25,000. So that was every day. And I tried to Google how many times did they have to get new shoes, and it just referred me to ox. Oxen needed to be resold, like the people's feet didn't matter. I'm sure that they wore out their shoes at a phenomenal rate, because remember the wagons were packed, and they weren't comfortable, and so you would hire someone to pull the wagon that was a bullwhacker, and they would drive your wagon with the oxen and the mules or whatever, because most people did not know how to do that. And everyone else walked, women and children, and of course they had to maintain a slow pace. But then they'd stop for lunch and have those beans and leftover breakfast, ready to go. Okay, thank you very much.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
What? Oh, jeez. That's why you guys are in the corner, Susan, they need an adult.
Yeah, but you knew what we were doing.
I was kind of waiting for it. You know who you can count on after a while. Okay. We're going to meet another Sarah. Sarah Winnemucca. Sarah Winnemucca was a northern Paiute woman who lived through a time of great change for her people. She witnessed their removal from their ancestral lands and tried to bridge the cultural gap between the native population and the whites who were coming along. She bravely spoke of the injustices to her people and tried hard all her life to improve their lives. So let's meet Sarah Winnemucca.
I was born around 1844. I don't remember exactly. I was a very small child when the first white people came into our country. My people were scattered at that time over nearly all of the territory now known as Nevada. At the time of my birth, northern Paiutes and Washus were the sole inhabitants of the land that is now western Nevada. My grandfather, Chief Truckee, sounds familiar, doesn't it? Welcomed the arrival of his white brothers and helped General John C. Fremont in the Bear War against the Mexican control of California. However, my father, Chief Winnemucca, did not trust the white people and cautioned his own people to keep their distance. Perhaps hearing these two opposite viewpoints led me to spend my life attempting to interpret the two cultures to each other. I was first introduced to white people at the age 6 when my grandfather insisted that I go with him to California. Initially frightened, I did like the luxuries such as beds, chairs, brightly colored dishes, and the food. When I was 13, my grandfather arranged for me and my sister to go to school, and by the time I was 14, I had acquired 5 languages, 3 Indian dialects, English and Spanish. As I reached maturity, the white immigration west continued to encroach on Paiute territory, and eventually whites insisted on moving all Indians onto reservations, and our days of hunting gathered freely had ended. In 1871, at the age of 27, I began working as an interpreter for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I married Lieutenant E.C. Bartlett, but left him within a year because of his intemperance, and later married an Indian husband, but left him for his gross abuse of me. In 1872, a fair and honest Indian agent was replaced with a less reliable agent, and problems mounted on the reservations. I prepared to travel to Washington, D.C. to speak out on behalf of my people, a trip that was interrupted while I aided U.S. troops in the Bannock War of 1878. I offered my services to the Army as an interpreter and scout. After traveling without sleep over 200 miles in 48 hours over treacherous Idaho terrain, I was able to save my father, whose lodge had been surrounded by hostile Indians. 8 years later, in January 1880, I was finally able to plead the Indians' cause in Washington, D.C. before the Secretary of the Interior and President Rutherford B. Hayes himself. I received promises of improvements for my people, which were later broken by the government. Despite my advocacy for my people, the broken promises caused them to distrust me. Still, I dedicated the remainder of my life to helping the tribe and gave more than 400 speeches to gain support for the Paiutes. She also wrote a book in 1888, Life Among the Paiutes, which is the first English narrative by an indigenous woman. After my husband died, I moved to Montana to spend my last days with my sister Elma. We would remember happier times when we used to celebrate the Festival of Flowers in the spring. Oh, with what eagerness we girls used to watch every spring for the time when we could meet with our hearts to light the young men who, in civilized life, you would call bold. I am so beautiful, who will come and dance with me while I'm beautiful? Oh, come and be happy with me. I shall be beautiful while the earth lasts. Then come, oh come, and dance and be happy with me. The young men would sing with us as they danced with us. And just of note, she was, her New York Times published her obituary when she died, which was her first as well.
Thank you very much. She did play an important, as we heard, thankless role. Her people were very disappointed that some of the promises that they were hoping would come through did not. I also found a quote from Sarah Winnemucca that said, "We would have helped the Donner Party, but we were afraid of them," which is a segue too, yes. And their fears may have been founded. I don't know if the two are related. I do not know the context of that comment. But one of the stories was that one of the men in the party hired two Miwok Indians to be guides. And when he realized that the guides weren't needed, there was nowhere to go, he found another use for them, which may have been why the Paiutes wanted nothing to do with them. There's a new change. There's two things. There's three new changes in the play. We introduced a brand new character that we made up. Now I'm going to introduce to you the very first Gaspar de Portola married couple, a match made in heaven, James and Margaret Reed. Now we know it as the Donner Party, but it was actually the Donner Reed Party. And when they reached the Sierra Nevadas, there were 81 people in the party. They, see, perfect married couple, right? So I knew it was magic. I got Kathleen. I asked Kathleen, "Can you be willing to do this?" And she said, "Sure." I didn't ask Linda. I thought she's a good sport. Alrighty, thank you. So by the time they were rescued, they were eating ox bone and skinned a hide that was boiling in water. So they weren't in great shape. But here's their story.
In 1846, my husband James and I left Illinois to head for the promised land of California, where we hoped to start a new life, but things didn't exactly go as planned. To begin with, I suffered from terrible headaches, and to make the trip as easy as possible for me, James built a 2-story wagon outfitted with an iron stove, spring cushioned seats, and bunks for sleeping. Dubbed as the palace car by our fellow travelers, it was by all accounts the largest and fanciest vehicle anyone had built for the westward migration. 8 oxen were required to pull this luxurious wagon, and its sheer size was a hindrance when the trail got rough. We also stocked 2 support wagons with fine food and liquor.
On August 30th, we reached the Great Salt Lake Desert. Several wagons mired down in the salt-crusted mud and had to be left behind. 32 of the oxen that pulled the wagons died, as well as some cattle. At my urging, we made a communal decision to attempt the Hastings Cutoff, as it would shorten the journey by 300 miles, rejoining the California Trail on the other side of the Sierras. It also meant we would arrive a month ahead of schedule. In spite of warnings by other travelers, I encouraged the others to take the cutoff. Little did I know that it had never been tested. In the end, the route cost us 5 weeks instead of saving 3, and people began to blame Hastings and I for their troubles.
On October 12th, our oxen were attached attacked by the Paiute Indians, and who killed 21 of them with poison-tipped arrows, further depleting their draft animals. Our camaraderie became splintered as each family began looking out for themselves and grew distrustful of others. As we became more disillusioned by the journey, tempers flared. It was at this time when supplies were low, animals were dying, and the days were hot by my husband got into an altercation with a young teamster, and in defending himself, stabbed him in the chest with a knife and killed him. As a result, James was banished by the train.
I refused to accept their decision. After all, he took his whip to me and I had to defend myself. Of course, he was well liked, and I was not. But it was clear there was nothing I could do so, and I finally agreed to go ahead to Sutter's Fort for supplies. Knowing my family would be taken care of by the others, I departed the next morning, alone and unarmed. But my stepdaughter, Virginia, rode ahead on horseback and secretly provided me with a rifle and food. And so I made my way alone across the Sierra Nevada, just ahead of the early and what would become deadly snows.
When we reached the Sierra Nevada mountains at the end of October, an early snowstorm brought us to a halt about 1,200 feet below the summit, only 90 miles east of our final destination, Sutter's Fort, near Sacramento. We attempted to force our few remaining wagons, oxen, and supplies over what is now known as Donner Pass, but due to freezing conditions and the lack of any pre-existing trail, we failed. Demoralized and low on supplies, about 3/4 of us camped at the east end of Truckee Lake, where the level ground and timber were abundant. We built rude shelters, hoping to resume our journey, but were forced to slaughter our oxen for food. On Thanksgiving, snow began falling again, eventually accumulating up to 30 feet, and we killed the last of our oxen for food. Snow continued to fall, and any hopes of continuing were dashed. We had come 2,500 miles in 7 months, only to lose the race with the weather by one day. The snow fell for weeks, burying our makeshift cabins. The frigid weather was unrelenting, and we had exhausted nearly everything edible: oxen and their hides, pet dogs, field mice, even leather shoelaces. By mid-December, when it became clear that the weather wasn't going to break, I joined 15 of the strongest and healthiest men and women and strapped on rudimentary snowshoes as we set out across the summit to find help. It was horrible climbing that great divide with frostbitten hands and feet, weakened by hunger, panting for air. The sun reflected off the snow and ice, and burned our corneas. The pain became unbearable. Our escapade was known as the Forlorn Hope.
Word spread quickly of the starving families trapped at Truckee Lake. The first rescue party, known as the First Relief, departed from Sutter's Fort with only 7 men, and the going was slow and dangerous. In some places, the snow was around 30 feet deep, and they had to ditch supplies along the way because their packs were too heavy. When they finally arrived at the Donner Party camps, they had little food left to distribute to the desperate families, but they offered to lead the strongest back down the mountain to safety. Sadly, many of those individuals didn't survive the journey. I was frantic to help, and in early February 1847, the citizens and naval officers of San Francisco funded a rescue party. I rounded up men and supplies in the Sonoma and Napa valleys, then headed up into the mountains. On February 19, 1847, the first team of rescuers trudged through the still snow-filled passes and reached Truckee Lake, finding what appeared to be a deserted camp, until the ghostly figure of a woman appeared. 4 relief parties rescued 47 people who had survived the ordeal. My wife and our 4 children were among them. Our reunited family recuperated in the Napa Valley for many weeks. Margaret had always been frail in health, but when disaster struck in the mountains, she became the bravest of the brave.
While waiting to assemble a search party, James spent time in San Jose and recognized the value of the rich, well-watered bottomland in the long, fertile valley nearby. Once we were well enough to travel, James leased orchards at Mission San Jose and moved us there. In the summer of 1847, we gathered and dried pears, apples, figs, and quince. We shipped the fruit to Hawaii, trading it for sugar, cocoa, coffee, and rice. James was elected to a new council at San Jose and moved our family into the Plug Club, renting the only space available, a one-room adobe with a dirt floor, where I gave birth to our 5th child. Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
So 81 people arrived at where they stopped, and 47 survived and made it to Setter's Fort, and of those 47, 32 were children. So most of the adults were lost along the way. When the story broke, it gathered tremendous attention. Newspapers published diaries and first-person accounts of what happened, and the public decided that they were very bad people. They survived. But one of the things that came out of that, though, was that they felt that they will never really know the true story, because every story varies, and so historians have sort of agreed that we may never know. Had the Donner Mead party not taken the Hastings cutoff, they would have arrived ahead of the storm, they would have made it into Sacramento, and they would have been forgotten to history. And we would never know their name. Donner Lake was probably Truckee Lake again, and they would not have existed. Sadly, though, they did take the Hastings cutoff. It delayed them, and they did end up in the mountains where they endured a very unusual and rare winter that just obviously gutted them in many, many ways. When they, but we remember them, right? Not fade into history, we remember them. When they arrived at Setter's Fort, many of them were scarred with malnutrition and frostbite, the result of frostbite, and lost things from that, and the psychological scars from what they had endured. And many of them were never the same afterwards. The Reed family did pretty well. They managed to survive and settle here in San Jose and Santa Clara Valley. I think the thing, though, about the Donner Party that so captivates us is that it begs the question that we ask ourselves, which is, what would I do to survive? And what would I do to see that my family survived? And I think that's kind of the horror of the whole thing when you realize there were people and they were desperate. And what would we do in that situation? So moving along. We're going to meet another remarkable woman, because all of these people and our lone guy are all remarkable. Biddy Mason was born a slave. She got her freedom in a landmark case. She was a nurse. She also was a real estate mogul, and in the early days, the wealthiest woman in the city of Angels, Los Angeles. So let's meet Biddy.
Hello.
This is a picture of my character, Biddy.
Please do subscribe.
And I envision her following a wagon train wearing a fake muskrat vest, so that's I'm Bridget Mason, but folks call me Biddy. I was born a slave in 1818 on a plantation in Georgia, but was separated from my parents and sold several times, working on various plantations, but spending much of my time assisting house servants and midwives. In 1836, my master gave me to his cousins, Robert and Rebecca Smith, as a wedding present. And so I went to the Smith plantation in Mississippi. I had no formal education, but I learned about midwifery and herbal medicines from other slave women and became a well-regarded midwife. In 1847, the Smiths converted to the Mormon religion. and moved their extended family and slaves, 90 people in all, to the Utah Territory. With my 3 young daughters, the youngest on my back, I walked behind my master's wagon train for 2,000 miles, over 7 months. I was responsible for herding cattle, preparing meals, and served as a midwife to women and livestock. When church leader Brigham Young sent a group of Mormons to San Bernardino, California to establish another community, Smith decided to join them. Young counseled Smith to free his slaves before going to California, but he refused, and once again, we walked behind the wagon through mountains and deserts to San Bernardino. Smith probably did not know that California had been admitted to the Union as a free state in 1850, and the law specified that any slave brought into the state was automatically free. Nevertheless, Smith refused to set us free, and so instead planned to take me and my daughters to Texas where he could sell us for a profit. Meanwhile, we befriended some free black men who persuaded the county sheriff to prevent Smith from taking us out of state. The sheriff kept us in the county jail for our protection until legal status could be determined. Robert Owens filed a petition claiming that Smith was legally holding the slaves in a free state. Robert Smith did not appear in court, but claimed that we were not slaves, but family members. The case was heard in the United States District Court of Appeals, and legal counsel for the slaves was financed by the Los Angeles black community. Since California law at the time prohibited blacks from testifying in court, I could not speak on my own behalf, but the judge met with me privately to hear my story. Judge Benjamin Hayes circumvented racial testimony laws that prevented blacks from testifying against whites by interviewing me in his chambers. There I told him that I did not want to go back to the South with the Smiths. As a result, in 1856, Hayes ruled that my children and I were forever free. My interview was satisfactory proof to the judge that he wrote that all of the said persons of color are entitled to their freedom forever and ever. It is therefore argued that we are entitled to their, skip the line. Anyway, on January 21st, 1856, Los Angeles County District Judge Benjamin Hayes granted the petition and gave me my freedom as a resident of a free state, as well as the freedom of other slaves held captive by Mr. Smith, namely my 3 daughters and 10 other African American women and children, all of whom had been held as slaves by Robert Smith during their 4-year residence in California. I went to Los Angeles where I became a doctor's assistant and ran a midwifery business, assisting in hundreds of births to mothers of all races and social classes. I earned $2.50 a day, a good wage for an African American woman at that time. Of course, I gave my services free to those who were unable to pay. By saving money and living frugally, I soon became financially independent. After working for 10 years, I had saved $250, and I started buying land. As a result, I was able to accumulate a fortune in land worth about $7.5 million in today's dollars, making me one of the richest women in Los Angeles. I established a homestead in what became downtown Los Angeles, using my wealth to establish a daycare center for working parents, and created an account at a store where families suffering from flooding and other acts of nature could get supplies. I also co-founded and financed the first African American Methodist Episcopal Church, which is still going strong. She was quite a woman. Biddy initially used the land for gardening and built some small houses to rent for additional income. She continued to rent accommodations for the next 18 years. When she was 66, she sold part of her land for $1,500 and built a commercial building on another parcel. She rented out storerooms on the ground floor and lived with her family on the second floor. Over the ensuing years, this enterprising ex-slave acquired several more lots in Los Angeles. As the town developed, most of her early investments became prime, urban real estate and formed the basis for her considerable wealth. In 1872, Biddy and her son-in-law, Charles Owens, founded and financed the first African American Episcopal Church, the city's first black church, and she donated the land on which the church was built. Her neighborhood developed quickly, and by the early 1890s, the main financial district of Los Angeles was 1 block away from Mason's property. Due to her shrewd investments, she was the wealthiest African-American woman in Los Angeles by the late 1800s. She spoke fluent Spanish, was a well-known figure downtown, and died on occasion at the home of Pio Pico, a wealthy Los Angeles landowner. The area ultimately became the central commercial district of Los Angeles. Through continued wise investments and real estate decisions, he acquired many parcels of land that, as the town developed, became prime urban lots. And she accumulated a fortune of almost $300,000, which she shared generously with charities. Biddy also fed and sheltered the poor. She visited prisoners in the local jail with gifts and aid. She was instrumental in founding a Traveler's Aid Center and an elementary school for black children. Because of her kind and giving spirit, many called her Grandma Mason. Needy people often lined up in front of 331 South Spring Street. One source says she also ran an orphanage in her house. Biddy Mason died January 15, 1891 in Los Angeles at the age of 73 and was buried in an unmarked grave at Evergreen Cemetery in the Boyle district of Los Angeles, I think.
I think you added a bit. No, to your script.
This is all you said, I just
That's all I
rearranged
sent you?
it. I know, I
I
know every
don't
time.
remember it.
But she
No,
gave
I don't
to me,
remember
so
it.
it's
I'm like,
okay.
I didn't know that.
Okay. Well, you didn't edit it, that's what.
Oh, I didn't send you the right copy.
Oh, I didn't.
It's called copy and paste.
I'm almost done.
Details, it's those pesky details.
Nearly
It's
a
fine, it's
century,
easy.
nearly a century later, her accomplishments were finally given due respect in a ceremony attended by Mayor Tom Bradley, the first African-American mayor of Los Angeles, and several thousand members of the First African Methodist Episcopal Church, when a tombstone marked her grave for the first time. A year later, November 16, 1989, was declared Biddy Mason Day in Los Angeles. The next day, a new mixed-use building called the Broadway Spring Center was opened on the spot where Mason's homestead once stood. The site includes an 8-foot by 81-foot memorial wall dedicated to Mason that includes a collage of her original home frame house. Biddy Mason Park has been established on the South Spring Street in Los Angeles, California. At one time, her grandson, Robert Curry Owens, a real estate developer and politician, was the wealthiest African-American in Los Angeles.
It was only supposed to be the first 2 pages.
It
It was interesting though. I don't want anyone else to feel cheated. I'm so fastidious about making everything the same.
I was wondering
But
why
she-
it was
yeah,
so long,
That's
but-
why, well, there you go.
But she is interesting.
Yes, all right. By the way, she chose the name Mason because ladies are born without last names, because she had a friend named Amasa Lyman, who was an elder in the Mormon church and also the mayor of San Bernardino. And her middle name was Mason, and she liked the name and she liked the woman, so she took that name when she became a free person. Now we're gonna meet another interesting person, and her story is a little controversial. And I'm gonna let Olive Oatman tell you her story, and you can decide for yourself.
The first AME church from Los Angeles was in the news this morning.
You're kidding.
The Reverend from there just died, and he's very prominent during the Rodney King trials, and he helped sort of combine the African American community in Los Angeles after the Rodney King verdict came out. So it's a very it's still has effect today. It was on Weekend Edition this morning.
He just died.
Olive Oatman. We pushed forward into the desert and in mid-February camped on an overlook above the Gila River, and desperately low in food were approached by a small group of what we believed to be Indians. They asked us for food and, perhaps not satisfied that we had none, began to take stock of our scant outfit and rummaged around inside our wagons. Within minutes, their demeanor changed and the massacre was underway. The Yavapai, some 19 in number, made quick work of my family, killing my father and my mother, who was pregnant with her 8th child, 4 of my siblings, and left my brother Lorenzo to die. Occasionally I could hear a low, piteous moan from someone of the family as in a dying state, and I distinguished the groans of my poor mother and sprang wildly towards her. but was held back by the merciless savage holding me in his cruel grasp and lifting a club over my head, threatened me in the most taunting, barbarous manner. After pillaging the wagon and securing what remained of our livestock, the Yavapai ushered me and my sister, Mary Ann, into the desert, where we embarked on our journey for more than 60 miles. I was 14 years old and Mary Ann was 7. After arriving in the village, we feared that we would be killed, but we were used as slaves, forced to forage for food, carry water and firewood, and other menial tasks. A year later, a group of Mojave Indians visited and traded 2 horses, vegetables, blankets, and other trinkets for us, after which we walked several hundred miles to a village near what is now Needles, California. The tribal leader and his family immediately adopted Mary Ann and I, and the Mojave were more prosperous than the Yavapai, and they took an interest in us and arranged for us to have given plots of land to farm. We were always fond of them. The Mojave marked both of us on our chins with indelible blue cactus tattoos in keeping with their tribal custom. According to Mojave tradition, such marks were given only to their own people to ensure that they would have a good afterlife. In the year 1855, the tribe experienced a severe drought and shortage of food, and my sister and many others died of starvation. She was only 11. Meanwhile, my brother Lorenzo, who survived his injuries, was still searching for us. At some point during the winter of 1856, the U.S. Army received word that I was living with the Mojave, and the post commander requested my return, or to know why I chose not to return. The Mojave initially resisted the request, first denying that I was white. Over the course of negotiations, they also expressed their affection for me. A second attempt was made to persuade the Mojave, offering blankets and a white horse in exchange, and casually mentioning that the whites would destroy the Mojave if they did not release me. After some discussion, in which I was included, the Mojave decided to accept these terms, and I was escorted on a 20-day journey to Fort Yuma. Before entering Fort Yuma, I insisted I be given proper clothing, as I was clad in a traditional Mojave skirt with no coverings above my waist. Inside the fort, I was surrounded by cheering people, and within a few days, I discovered my brother Lorenzo was alive and had been looking for me. Our reunion made headlines across the West.
So everybody was celebrating this return, and a book was published shortly thereafter by Reverend Royal Stratton called The Survival of the Open Girls. It made a lot of money. It was a bestseller, sold out 3 editions in 1 year, because it was the only account of a surviving Indian captivity. But it was very controversial because many people felt that it exploited Olive and her brother and took advantage of them. Although he was financially generous, gave them the money to go to college and get established, he made it sound like she had been a willing accomplice, and then also that she had been mistreated. So nobody really knows. She herself never really talked about it. She married. She and her husband adopted a little girl. She was a strong advocate of orphans, but never talked about her own experience as an orphan. And interestingly, she always kept a jar of hazelnuts, which was a staple in the Mojave diet. And that's why there are hazelnuts on the table. So nobody really knows. She was very tight-lipped about it, and how she was actually treated, because it leads you to believe that she was treated as a welcome member and not as a slave. So who knows? Another mystery unsolved for those of you who are looking for something to do. Okay, thank you. Basically, what we've learned is that women were just as strong and just as adventurous as the men in crossing over into the West. Many left their families behind. They took on the work that men did. They did the same things. They drove the oxen, they took care of the animals. Plus, of course, they had to do what we are expected to do, which is cook the food, wash the clothes, mind the children and the men, who sometimes are indistinguishable, and often while pregnant, postpartum, or nursing, sometimes both. So women really carried a lot of the load, and one of the things that one of the women said was, I felt a secret joy in learning that I had the power to move things along. And they did. Everywhere women went, soon thereafter there were schools, churches, libraries, literary societies, charitable organizations flourished. So women clearly had a positive impact on the settlement of the West, and perhaps in no stronger way than suffrage. They had learned that they were equal to men. They had obtained a certain amount of autonomy in life on the trail and spread that to other women throughout the U.S. By 1900, which was 20 years before national suffrage, 4 Western states had given women the right to vote. And as we heard today, these women were a big, big part of that. I want to just read you one final quote. The dust clings to everything, and my back aches from the endless chores. Yet when I look up at the Milky Way, ablaze in the night sky, 1,000,000 miles away from anything familiar, a strange calm washes over me. We women huddle together, sharing stories and laughter, a band of sisters facing the unknown. Fear is always a shadow, but we push on, for the promise of California lies ahead, and we are determined to reach it, no matter the cost. And that's the pioneer spirit that we have all inherited. And I have one more guest, one more person I am very excited for all of you to meet. I am very honored to present Emily Dixon.
Do you mind if I keep my coat on?
No. There's a heater here if you'd like to sit over there. Or you can just stand where you are, however you want to do it. Can we find, is it in the corner? All right.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for asking me to speak to you today. My name, as you all know, is Emily S. Stanton. Both my great-grandfather and grandfather fought in the War of the Revolution, which makes me a real granddaughter of the American Revolution. My family migrated to Illinois via the Erie Canal and settled near Chicago and lived in a log cabin. In the spring of 1853, my brother contracted the California fever. He joined an immigrant train, reached California, bought government land, and settled down to farming. Seeking a warmer climate for his health, my father also made the trip to California, but via Panama. Upon his arrival, he purchased land and begged my mother to bring our big family overland to the land of the Golden West. So, in 1859, my brother returned home to help my mother prepare for our journey to California. Our immigrant train started in April, and on this journey of 6 months, we escaped many disasters and many dangers. I was 6 years old by this time, and how distinctly I yet remember walking along the paths where the wheat grew far above my head. We arrived in California in October at the new home our father had prepared for us near Stockton. And my youngest sister and I learned to read and write at home, but we did receive some formal education. I attended the State Normal School in San Francisco on Market Street. It was built of redwood planks, very primitive. And Market Street was unpaved, and a little horse cart ran up and down, back and forth to the ferry. I married Dr. E.H. Pardee of Oakland in 1879, At the age of 29, in 1881, my daughter was born. She grew to be a beautiful and lovely girl to the age of 15. My husband had had a long illness of 2 years and died after an operation. And our daughter took a sudden illness 3 months later and never fully recovered. As you can imagine, I was broken in health and in spirit. So for the next several years, I traveled all over our country and in Europe. In 1903, I bought a home in the famed city of Palo Alto, California. And here I have been these many, many years. From 1905 to the present time, I've been active in the work of the Palo Alto Women's Club and was president 3 years. Also, chairman of the building committee, which built the clubhouse. In 1910, I headed the women's suffrage work here and was a member of the WTCU. I married James Leroy Dixon in 1916, but sadly that marriage only lasted 6 years. 1925 was an exciting and challenging year for me. Hence, underneath this coat is an outfit, which depicted my time of life then. 1925 was the year I organized Gaspar de Portola, chapter Daughters of the American Revolution. And so was the organizing region. I had been a delegate to the Continental Congress twice, and the year of 1938 was one of the years I was privileged to see the magnificent new Constitution Hall. This wonderful building stands within a short distance of the White House in Washington. And it was built at a cost of more than $1.5 million. During my administration, our chapter bought one of the chairs in the main auditorium for $150. I still maintain my dear old home in Palo Alto, where I love to receive my friends. And I decided some 6 years ago to give my home to the city of Palo Alto as a memorial to my dearly departed daughter, Nellie R.D. And now, at the age of 80+ years, I sit and reflect on the event and the events of these past years. And I hope that those women who have been associated with me in efforts to advance the social life of our city will think of me kindly, for I have tried to work unselfishly. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I wanted to do that to kick off the 1-year celebration of the 100th anniversary of our chapter. And I have some really interesting news. I went on, these are her words. This is an excerpt of her words that are taken from our archives. And I had to shorten them to fit in the time frame, but I wanted a picture of her. So I went online and I thought there has to be a picture of her somewhere, and I found one on a website about weird Unitarians.
Oh.
So it was Emily, in between Pardee and Dixon, there was a Carnes. And he sued her for divorce on the grounds of desertion. She countered that her doctor told her she couldn't live with him anymore. And so she sued him for desertion. Now, I don't know anything more than that, but there was something else on that page that I hope you all are as excited as I was to find out. A woman by the name of Barbara Nedeker, who lives in Walnut Creek, is the great-grandniece of Emily. And she has sent me some pictures, which I'll show you next month. She has some stories to share. She has the diary. Emily's older sister kept a diary of their journey on the wagon train. Emily was too young. And I I'm hoping that she and some of her family will join us in January when we celebrate.
Yay.
The family lives in Lodi, and apparently there's a museum in Lodi. When her home in Palo Alto, the city sold it a few years ago, and Barbara told me that her family came and took some of the possessions home with them. But she did not have this article that was in our archives, and she and her sister were very pleased to have it. And then she told me the article in the Unitarian thing, it really did, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but some kind of weird, yeah, I don't know. I don't think Unitarians are weird necessarily, but that was a strange story. But anyway, she was very excited to get that information and share it with her family, so hopefully we'll be able to do some exchanging. So I think that's really nice that we can share the anniversary with her family. Yes.
This is her picture.
Yes, that's the picture from the website. Yeah, but I have a picture of her from the late 1800s that was taken camping with Dr. Pardee and her daughter. At least that's what Barbara thinks, so I have that for next month. So thank you so much for leading us into that. I know we've run a little bit over, I apologize. Very quickly, thank you to our players. Please stand up and be recognized. And when the meeting adjourns, let's all stay for a second to get a picture. And also, thank you again to everyone who was a part of today. And is there any further business? Yes,
I have door prizes,
okay.
and I also want to ask if anybody has French-Canadian roots.
What?
French-Canadian roots?